the most polluted hotspot area across the four countries. This includes Bangladesh, Nepal, India, as well as Pakistan. This particular airshed has about 1.2 billion people in it. And unfortunately, that includes those that are in Pakistan. Globally, 2.3 billion people are exposed to outdoor air quality levels that are greater than 35 micrograms per cubic meter for PM 2.5, and most of these live in South Asia. The eye of the storm, in terms of air quality, lies within the Indo-Gangetic Plain and Himalayan foothills, as it is the most polluted hotspot currently. Air pollution has significantly reduced human capital and development and the economy. If we're talking about financing air quality, we need to identify the issues. The first being in the South Asia region, 2 million people have premature deaths each year. That is the average South Asian losing, on average, the life expectancy of 5 years. The average South Asian lives more than 2 weeks a year suffering from air pollution-related diseases. And just think about it, how many times you've had a prolonged respiratory infection or issue or virus. The most significant diseases include heart disease, lung disease, and diabetes. The adverse health effects have high economic costs in terms of reduced labor productivity and foregone output. The annual welfare costs in South Asia, in that particular Indo-Gangetic Plains and Himalayan foothill regions, has been estimated to cost 10% of GDP per annum. So from a healthy life to a disease or disability to an early death, which has reduced expected life years. However, let's talk about what the current status quo of funding is. I've already asked you to memorize a number, a figure, 1%. That just 1% of international funding targets outdoor air pollution projects in the time period between 2019 and 2023. This underfunding is persistent and it's a chronic issue. Our analysis shows that the most polluted low and middle income countries, particularly in the most vulnerable areas, are missing out on funding almost entirely. Second is the scarcity of funding. Scarcity of grant funding hampers progress. The types of funding is critical. This is a stark contrast to the 63% share of grant funding across other developmental assistance. 92% of air quality funding is provided in the form of loans. Only a third of those loans are actually at concessional rates, essentially rates that are more favorable and not at the market rate. And 2/3 of it are at the market rate, which creates a debt hurdle and will hinder the uptake of vital assistance. One other thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the issue of black carbon. Black carbon receives smaller amounts of funding despite its unique climate and health impacts. And this is due to the fact that we only have 0.1% of donors funding that supports black carbon, which affects both climate and health impacts dually, only amounts for 18 million of the 16 billion of funds that are provided to air quality between 2018 and 2022. More funding to tackle black carbon could actually unlock significant benefits, both in the climate sector as well as the health benefits. However, I'm not going to be one to be a negative neg on this particular issue. The solutions are within reach. We have seen this across the world where we have worked and reduced the amount of emissions that are caused by countries in their developmental cycle, looking through certain integrated policy packages. This comes with conventional air pollution controls, as well as decarbonization policies that reduce impacts like black carbon emissions by almost 2/3. The integrated approach is critical to ensure that we address the issues of poor air quality. I started my presentation by talking about two numbers, 7.5 million, the number of breaths you take a year, but also that 1%, which is the amount of development financing that is given to air quality projects. But this is another aspect that I'd like you to also consider and possibly memorize. These three buckets of priorities of accelerating investments towards clean air. And we've got very good examples of this from various particular areas. If we look at strengthening institutions for air quality governance, this will first of all place clean air at the center of government's economic and welfare agenda, empower an airshed like the Indo-Gangetic Plains and Himalayan foothills to achieve results faster and reduce the cost. Second, leverage information. Invest in collecting, assessing, and leveraging air quality data. This has been seen very well across the world in many of the projects that the World Bank has done, but also has been seen and rolled out currently in the Punjab work that has been done under the Punjab Clean Air Program in collaboration with the World Bank. This particular program looks as well as engaging citizens on clean air action, raising an awareness about this particular issue. Because only through awareness raising can we bring about the behavioral change that is needed to address poor air quality, as well as prioritize the most cost-effective emission reductions first. And we do this through various modeling and
ensuring that clean air is dealt with. But this will be followed by Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. The policies that create clean air markets also needs to be looked at. How do we start linking economic development with reducing the issues around air quality? Establish the attractive environments for private sector investments, critically to ensure that the private sector is also involved in this. A lot of what the private sector is trying to ensure is making profit. However, that profit needs to be linked to ensuring we're also addressing the issues, the environmental issues like air quality. Lastly, redirecting environmentally harmful subsidies and policies like fertilizer subsidies, which contribute to secondary pollutants in air quality. These particular aspects need to be really looked at and seen how we can address them. Those three buckets are what, at the World Bank, we are looking to do through our various programs to ensure that we address poor air quality, but ensure financing is provided for it. Lastly, significant additional financing is needed to address the air quality target. From our estimates, we identify that additional cumulative investments that is needed to halve the number of people exposed to high levels of poor air quality and to meet WHO interim target of 25 micrograms by 2040
needs an investment of 3.2 trillion. This is obviously a great effort. However, as a share of global GDP, the investment cost following the integrated approach that we have suggested, we recommended actually falls from 1% of global GDP to 0.4% by 2040. This would require us to increase funding from 8.5 billion in 2020 to 13.9 billion annually until 2040 to ensure we can address the issue of climate change. Well, climate change and poor air quality. However, we also talked about ensuring that both the public and private investments are done in clean air. And these need to look at specific areas like strengthening monitoring and results measurement, linking financial incentives to results achievement, and appropriately blend finance to achieve payback methods for clean technologies that allow for a rapid market penetration. Together we can do it. We can ensure that 1% increases much more than where it is currently. Ensuring that we bring back to the 7.5 million, going back to the 7.5 million breaths you take a year. Let's try and ensure that you can breathe much better in the future. On behalf of the World Bank, I thank you.
We will now invite onto the stage Fatima Attarwala, Editor Business and Finance Weekly Dawn, Arslan Mohammed Iqbal, CRO Bank of Punjab, and Rafay, Environmental Lawyer.
Hello everyone, I'm Fatima Attarwala. I head the Business and Finance pages at Dawn, and I'm the host of All Things Money, a podcast that airs on DawnNews English. I think since morning what we have heard again and again and again and again is that we have a lot of dirty air in Pakistan. When my family wakes up in the morning and everybody has sniffles and coughs, the normal thing to say in Karachi is, "Mausam badal gaya hai, isliye nazla ho raha hai." But I think now we know that it's not the weather that is changing, it's the constant existence of dirty air. Like the Honorable Minister Musaddiq Malik Saab said, just breathing this air is like smoking cigarettes. Everybody sitting in this room right now, we are losing seconds of our lives just because we are breathing. So yes, undoubtedly, this is something that needs to be worked on. But why would anybody work on it? It makes sense for the government to do it because they are the government, the public sector will do it, the multilateral donors will do it. But how long can their resources last? Without a business case, without profitability, all the best efforts will reach a limit. So my argument today and the conversation that we are going to have today is how do we make air pollution work for Pakistan? How do we use it in our businesses? How do we make a sustainable business model out of it? And how do we talk about it in terms of international market and access to climate financing? With me today are Rafay, a renowned environmental lawyer, as well as Arslan Iqbal, Chief Risk Officer of Bank of Punjab. Now, historically, as the Honorable Minister Maryam Aurangzeb Sahiba said, the private sector in Pakistan has not really stepped up towards climate change efforts. There's a report by UN which stated that regionally and globally, about 49% of climate financing comes from the private sector. In Pakistan, it's about 5%. Globally, according to the Clean Air Fund, investments in clean financing for clean air, there are about only 1% of international development funds. So within climate financing, air quality has been ignored. And perhaps it's been ignored because it's invisible, it's a silent killer, and it's a public good. It's a shared responsibility, which is why maybe nobody is taking responsibility for it. So my first question to you for Rafay, Mr. Rafay Alam, is what are the regulatory challenges that the country faces because of which there's a disconnect between the private sector and the government and the targets that need to be met?
When it comes to the environment and air pollution,
The disconnect is one of perception, I think. People want to have a clean environment. They like a clean environment. They talk about, I have plants at my house and I turn the tap off when I brush my teeth. But these are cosmetic, superficial ambitions. Cleaning the environment or cleaning the air, look at it this way. You have to use the black and white of printed policy paper to manifestly change the quality of the outside air or, say, water. So, black and white to actual physical change. That requires an immense and very accurate amount of information and data. You can't do it without that. And also, most improvements in the environment are not overnight solutions. They take time and they take money. And I think people forget just how expensive it is to maintain clean air and how expensive it is to maintain clean water. And stepping into this business with all the best of intentions, you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my God, I want to improve the air quality, but where do I get $5 billion to upgrade the refineries in Pakistan from? Yes, I want to do public transport and buses, but that's billions and billions of rupees as well. So the cost and the time frames involved, I think people don't understand them. I think I'll end here for that. It's a question of perception, really. That's why there's a disconnect.
I think you're very right in who bears the cost. As Honorable Minister Mariam Aurangzeb said earlier in the day, we can have dustbins in schools, in government schools, that separate waste the way they do in Japan. Perhaps you can have them in private schools, but why would private schools have them? What incentive do private schools have to have those dustbins, even though it would help the current generation and generations in the future? So the question remains, how do we incentivize the private sector to set up? Arslan, Iqbal sir, can you tell me what role commercial banks can play in reducing air pollution when profitability is a core driver?
So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. While profitability is a core driver for any capitalist society or the capitalist way of government, there are numerous projects and feasibilities available to do business in a greener way,
to do business while it still remains sustainable. And banks have always been playing a key role in having this capital available to such businesses, to such borrowers. And banks usually, 10 years ago shied away from, such kind of initiatives just because of lack of understanding and obviously lack of knowledge. One tends to be, afraid of the unknown. So until and unless, cash flows start dropping in, banks, do not lend to such projects. And it is always about the ability to repay.
But over the last few years, our regulator, the State Bank of Pakistan, has come up with numerous guidelines and regulations, especially the recent one, which is the Environment and Social Risk Management Framework, under which banks have to promote green financing, have a control on own impact, so by way of own impact reduction, and this framework is mandatory and to be adopted by the end of this year. Other products or role that a bank can play is through green financing, direct green financing of of various products, whether they're power products. By the way, BOP was one of the first banks in the country to solely do a solar power project back in 2014, when no other bank wanted to go down this road. And everybody knows about this Sky-Driven solar power project, and it is working very efficiently even today, and the debt has been repaid just because of those cash flows. It was a cash cow back then, So it's all about, so once such projects start slowly and gradually, banks have started to pick up, and Bank of Punjab alone has financed more than 600 megawatt of clean energy. So there are, we've been participating in, the Government of Punjab's Clean Air, program as well. So there are multiple ways in which, banks can extend financing for, whether it's vehicle financing, EV financing, which we've done. We financed 3,000 EVs for, under the Government of Punjab scheme. Whether it's for, power projects. So multiple revenue streams are available under this. And it's just about the appetite of the market to come out and bring these, alternate products into the market. You have to create a demand for it.
Absolutely. When we talk about demand and energy, I think the solar boom in Pakistan is one of the best examples of how the demand in the market shifted many megawatts, gigawatts towards solar energy, even though it created its own set of problems. So, but talking about emissions and clean energy, Mr. Rafay, sir, some research suggests that about 45% of air pollution comes from tailpipe emissions. Now, yes, we need cleaner fuel, perhaps we need EVs, but again, what role can environmental regulation play in unlocking finance? For example, refineries are great, and who should bear the cost? Should it be the refinery, should it be the regulator, should it be the government?
Well, firstly, we're beginning to, there are a few reports that suggest that the overwhelming year-long contributor to air pollution in Pakistan cities is emissions from automobiles. And that points not just to some of the old rolling stock of combustion engines, but also to the very poor quality of petrol and diesel that we refine here in Pakistan. The control over the quality of refineries is actually skewed between the federal government and the provinces. The federal government Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Resources has something called the Pakistan Petroleum Refining, Blending and Marketing Rules of 1971, which it has used up until recently, 2016, 2017, to set what is known as the RON, R-O-N of fuel, which is the efficiency with which it combusts, and also with regard to the addition of manganese into petrol, which is something petrol companies were doing to hide the RON quality. At the same time, on the provincial level, all the provincial environment protection agencies, by the very law that they're set up with, have the power and authority to direct either a specific automobile or a class of automobiles to fit such pollution control devices as may be determined, and also to set fuel quality standards. So the EPAs can actually tell fuel companies that you need to produce Euro 5. But they haven't. None of them have, because the general belief is that the EPAs don't have the capacity, or rather the authority to carry that out. That's really the subject of the federal government. As far as the federal government is concerned, there has been an awareness of the low-quality fuel in Pakistan for quite some time. I think in 2006, there was a cess that was levied so that the refinery companies could collect revenue that they could put into this billion-dollar sort of expenditure they required to be upgraded. I don't know what happened to that money, but in 2022 or 23, there's a new refinery policy that extends. It says in the next 5-6 years, the refineries have to go and do this. So they're collecting a cess from us, so we become the final payer of this investment, but we will eventually reap the benefits as well, because it will be a huge chunk of air pollution improved. So there is a regulatory mechanism, I think, for fuel quality. The other thing is that other than automobiles, you have air pollution caused by energy production and also through industry. There are numerous industries in Pakistan and Punjab, each one of which could benefit from various pollution control devices. I think we need to encourage a market for the availability of these pollution control devices, and then those industries, through the polluter pays principle, who would have to be investing in them. And that's, I think, where financing can become helpful, especially for small and medium enterprises. I find actually that large industries in Pakistan have no problem complying with environmental law by and large. But the trick is with the small and medium industries, which are much greater in number. They don't have the sort of money and they don't have the sort of land and other resources which can help them do this.
But I think you need a market for things like pollution control devices, and I think we have the financing for it as well, and you get the ball rolling quickly enough, and what even the SMEs will find, what pollution control devices and better technologies do is they allow you to consume your raw materials and resources far more efficiently. That usually winds up meaning more profit for the industrialist. So at the end of the day, if you comply with the environmental regulations, you're consuming resources more efficiently and you're producing things more cheaply. So it turns out, by and large, to be a win-win for everyone.
Okay, so if I were to answer the question that I asked, who should bear the cost? In the case of energy tailpipe emissions, it is us, because we are paying part of the cess, and that makes sense. We are breathing the air, we should help address it. And in the second case, when we talk about SMEs and we talk about the informal sector, if they see a business case for, if they can get more profits by being more transparent and more accountable, then yes, obviously they would also want to shift to greener sources of greener processes. But then the question comes, how do we create that awareness? How do we let them know this is how you do it? By their very nature, SMEs are small. By their very nature, they're not very literate. And the informal sector, because it's not tapped, because it's not digitalized, it's harder to reach. If we could, we would tax them. So how do we address, how do we explain this to the informal sector, to the SMEs?
Look, Pakistan is not the first country to face environmental issues. Other countries and other environmental regulatory authorities have done this through the course of the 20th century. The first generation of enforcement is relatively straightforward. If you pollute, we'll shut you down, we'll close you down. But industries and economies around the world realize that if you approach economic activity with this attitude, you won't have any economic activity. So the second generation of environmental regulation was much more Pigouvian this way, that you do things like impose taxes, have rebates, financial incentives, tax write-offs, polluter pays. These are all financial incentives, sort of market-oriented to help people improve their behavior, which is worked in some parts of the world, but like I said, in Pakistan, where the vast number of industry is SME and they don't have the land or the resources, how much blood are you going to get out of this polluter pays rock, so to speak? And we need to question that, I think, in Pakistan's socio-economic milieu, and that is a tricky one. That's a debate that we're not having right now.
So maybe it's trial and error, like we heard earlier in the day, that in Punjab they are taking down bricklanes and ensuring that they are more clean than they were before.
Can I just say, zigzag brick technology is not a technology, and also it does not bring air emissions within the environment quality standards. It has demonstrably failed as a means of controlling air pollution. There are other pollution control technologies that brick kilns can employ, and I don't understand why our regulators have taken it to heart that brick kilns will be zigzag when they know themselves that the white dust that comes out is still many times worse than their own guidelines. I don't understand why they do this. When there is, and I've spoken to brick kiln people, I've represented them, I have clients who have invented pollution control technologies here in Punjab, but the EPA refuses to hear them because zigzag brick kiln. So that idea of having a sort of market for pollution control technologies fails in the face of this inadequate enforcement that the EPAs are doing. It's very frustrating to know that there are technologies available, just as it's very frustrating to remind people that if you remember, not 5-6 years ago, we turned off industry and went home for 1 week because of the pandemic, and the air cleaned up in front of us. We know exactly what we need to do, and it's heartbreaking to know that clean air is only 4 or 5 days away from us right now.
Absolutely, and I think this is a wonderful example of how there's a lack of awareness at all levels, and it doesn't actually have to be at the SME and informal level. Within that scenario, how can commercial banks play a role in reducing air pollution? Within that scenario, what kind of financial products, green bonds, concession loans, credit lines for SMEs, could banks design to directly support clean air measures, but with the understanding that the technology that is being deployed is not such that is harming the nation, or that is, the technology is not pointless. The technology that is actually helping clean air. Can banks actually enforce that?
So this is a very pertinent question. But the first and foremost thing that needs to be understood is there has to be a demand to fund such projects. If a consumer, if a borrower is going to come to a bank and not ask, for this green financing product, banks are not going to, be able to finance it. Yes, banks do play a role, and they already are playing a role in creating awareness. Every bank has its own, way of doing this. In 2025, Pakistan issued its first PKR-denominated green bond, PKR 1 billion under Parvaz Financial Services. This is to fund, clean energy to avoid thousands of tons of CO2 emissions. Also, the government of Pakistan issued a 30 billion domestic green sukuk recently under a sustainable investment sukuk framework.
So the funding is there, and Bank of Punjab again set an example by we are the only bank that has been able to get a 50 million euro on lending facility from a multilateral in France from AFD. So we're going to use that money to fund green energy and green projects. And we're already in the process of funding under this AFD. Also, the State Bank of Pakistan has allowed SMEs to borrow up to 10 million as clean facility, so you don't need security. One of the biggest challenges that SMEs face usually is providing security to a bank, and banks are bound by the regulations set by its regulator. So now there is this window of opportunity where SMEs can borrow up to 10 million clean without having to provide any collateral or security or any kind of mortgage. So this provides some cushion for them to borrow under green products to facilitate themselves on the ESG front. So the room is there. Also, banks can partner with multilateral and bilateral donors to get concessional capital or guarantee support, do risk sharing when financing the clean air investment projects. So the demand has to be there. So as a bank, I know for my bank as well as for the industry, the appetite is there. We do funding, largely, and we have a framework where we judge a borrower. We have a green checklist. We have a environmental and social due diligence checklist that we do for every kind of borrower, and we screen them. And it's part of a risk, rating mechanism. So the awareness within the banks are there. The systems, the frameworks are either already in place in some banks or being put in place. The demand for such products have to come up, and it's the industry at large that has to bring this.
I think what you're saying, and again what we come up against is that there has to be more awareness of the availability of funds, awareness for climate financing, for there to be a business case for demand. So for my last question, Mr. Rafay, so I would like to ask, we are not the only polluted country in the world, and a lot of countries have addressed those issues. So if you could emulate one example from one country, what would it be?
I'll give you examples, but then you'll say, oh, these are all rich white countries, and it's true. But you have to hear how it started. You hear, for example, Amsterdam, where there are a lot of cycles. It wasn't the case after World War II. In fact, Stockholm as well had immense automobile-related pollution. The UK, London, had immense pollution after World War II as well. There was huge amounts of pollution in the US state of California up and through the 70s, and even in New York City as well. And there have been laws made in each of these countries to address air pollution. And you think, haan, theek hai, unhone kanun bana diya, and it's a white country, it's a developed country, they can implement the law. But that law came from somewhere. In the case of Stockholm, after World War II, they put a lot of industrial production into making their automobiles, Saab. But most old European cities are medieval. They have small, narrow roads. And this overproduction of cars in European cities led to air pollution and also to kids being killed on roads, being run over on their way to school. And so in the case of Stockholm, it was angry mothers who, in a campaign to re-elect a mayor who would take cars off the street, started the air pollution revolution there. Similarly, in Amsterdam, it was again to protect kids, but it was a political movement. There was a voice for a more sustainable, clean air future, a safer city for children, and a voice of civil society that was so strong and so durable that it could withstand the 5-year election cycle. Because things like cleaning air and cleaning water aren't overnight tasks. It requires that demand Arslan is talking about from us, from civil society. Because देखिए, at the end of the day, I remain optimistic, even in this country. अगर आपको सड़क चाहिए, आपको सड़क मिल जाती है. अगर आपको अस्पताल चाहिए, आपको अस्पताल मिल जाता है. अगर आपको स्कूल चाहिए, स्कूल बन जाएगा, मगर you have to ask for it. We have to ask for clean air. We missed the opportunity in the 2023 elections. I was surprised that air pollution wasn't an issue in Punjab. But we have to make it a demand for our elected representatives to act on it.
So I think if I were to just sum up the discussion we had, awareness, political will, but more importantly, the will of the people in asking for this is what would drive Pakistan towards cleaner air. Thank you so much, Sir Rafay and Sir Arslan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful session. We will now hear closing remarks from Zafar Masood, Chairman, Bank of Punjab.